The manifest destiny, which originated in the 19th century, had a profound and frequently negative impact on the Native Americans. This ideology stated that the United States was destined to expand through the Northern American continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast. Manifest destiny's overwhelming implementation had a negative impact on the Native Americans. Good morning, my name is Rafael Bones, and our presentation is on Native Destiny.
I'm Sana Siddiqui.
I'm Hallie Julius.
I'm Bernardo Mello.
And I'm Maria Rocha. Our group question is, how did the widespread acceptance and implementation of the Manifest Destiny in the 19th century affect the Native Americans during that time period? The widespread acceptance and implementation of the Manifest Destiny in the 19th century affected the Native Americans by negatively impacting on their culture.
As a team, we have created the resolution to redress historical injustices and the long-lasting impact of the Manifest Destiny on Native Americans in the 19th century. This would include a variety of actions aiming at reconciliation, restitution, and empowerment.
The government implemented policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forcibly relocated numerous of Native American tribes from their homelands in the southeast to areas west of the Mississippi River. These acts were rarely taken lightly by the Native Americans, and these interferences led to even more conflicts against the armies, leading to more deaths and bureaucratic issues.
The loss of land that Native Americans experienced during the era of Manifest Destiny had profound and devastating impacts on their way of life. According to the video uploaded by Jason Ball, said by Dr. Richard Littlefair, a Northern Cheney president, all of this meant a lot of dying for us, it meant a lot of unsettling, it meant a lot of displacement, and it meant a lot of losing our land. The loss of sacred sites and spiritual connection to their land had a deep psychological and cultural impact. As a result, the erosion of their cultural heritage and enduring legacy of their trauma persists to this day. This shows the settlers moving west taking over the native land. Young Native Americans were forced to attend boarding schools that stripped them of their native roots. Students were only allowed to speak English and not allowed to speak their native languages. Discipline was strictly maintained in these boarding schools. Punishments ranged from privilege limits to diet restrictions to even imprisonment. Furthermore, Native people were ignored and subjected to a variety of forms of abuse, including physical, spiritual, cultural, and sexual. They were beaten and forced to do hard labor. This is an example of a young Native American who attended Catskill Indian School, and this is before he attended school, and this is after.
After they moved west, Native Americans would be forced to change. Native American kids were being put into boarding schools and forced to learn English and American culture. The U.S. government did that with the intention of merging tribal traditions with the American culture and unifying the majority of society. As you can see in the first picture, you can see a Native American trying on his new clothes. And in the second picture, you can see a Native American before and after the civilization of cultures. Before him using his usual clothes and after a suit. The Manifest Destiny paved the way for the Civil War by intensifying the slavery issue, making it one of the most divisive economic, social, cultural, and political impacts of the 19th century. As you can see in this political cartoon, you see the Cherokee Nation, which serves to show the Native Americans and all the things that made them suffer, including railroads, U.S. courts, politicians, and federal courts. The railroads were the main contributors to the murder of the bison, which were their only source of food and shelter. And the U.S. courts were, as shown as the scissors in the political cartoon, wore the scissors because every time a Native American was put into a boarding school, they were forced to cut their hairs, which had a cultural and spiritual significance to them.
As Bernardo said, land belonging to Native Americans was lost. As shown in this ad made in 1910, you can see the introduction of the Dawes Act of 1887. This act allowed for land, tribal land, and reservations to be broken up. This allowed for settlers to buy land for cheap, and it advocated for its efficiency. As settlers expanded westward, conflicts between Native American communities and U.S. government officials became more evident. These conflicts resulted in conflicts and resulted in the loss of life. Shown in this picture, you can see President Ulysses S. Grant introducing the peace policy. This was made in efforts to convince Native Americans of fundamental dependency on the U.S. government, and this was made to reduce the so-called Indian problem. And during his presidency, he appointed army officials which performed didactics to make known of their benevolence, though this was an illustration of intellectual shallowness. As you can see in this picture, you can see that this had resulted in conflicts due to the military action performed by appointed officials which led to violent resistance of the Native Americans.
So, a resolution. As we saw, historical injustices and the impact of the idea of manifest destiny on the Native Americans in the 19th century had a variety of actions aiming at reconciliation, restitution, and empowerment, which widely impacted Native Americans.
As Maria was saying, those impacts had a lot of losses. For example, they had a loss of culture, a loss of land, and they went through major poverty. In this chart by the Economic Policy Institute, we can see that Native Americans had the highest poverty rate as of 2016 in the United States. The Native Americans were the first group of people to ever be in North America, so they had a head start. And all with that head start, due to manifest destiny and the westward expansion, they suffered greatly. Another example is the loss of land. As of 1784, they owned over 85% of the now known United States. And throughout time, westward expansion continued. They lost more and more land until 1895, where they finally were left with less than 5% of the United States. That is just unfair. Now, due to that loss of land, they lost tradition and culture. Thank you.
Back up, just scoot together. Hallie, I'll start with you. Hallie, reflecting on the work of the other people in your group, the different IRRs and stuff that you read, who's had the greatest impact on your understanding of manifest destiny?
I think that Maria's had the greatest impact because she talks about the cultural aspect of manifest destiny, which is mostly what I was supposed about. So the cultural aspects of Native Americans.
Okay. Next up, Sana, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided not to use in the presentation, and then why?
So in Bernardo's paper, he included a lot of the positive impacts and like the resources that came up after. So we didn't use that because we were talking about the cultural impacts and how they were negatively impacted by that.
All right, thank you. Rafael, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about the research you conducted?
In my research paper, it was about the ethicalness about the situation, and in our paper, our final conclusion was about how the culture was changed. While in mine, I talked a lot about the land and stuff, so it did give me a different viewpoint on how everything happened.
All right. Maria, describe an argument from one of your peers' reports that made you think differently about the overall conclusion you guys came up with.
So, like Hallie said before, on Bernardo's papers, there was a lot of positive effects. He talked about the positive effects of the railroads and everything about that. My paper was about culture, and it was most like related to like the negative sides and stuff like that. Most of my paper, I was only looking at how the Native Americans were negatively affected, and not really looking at how the manifest destiny affected the United States in a positive way, because transportation, of course, is a big thing today, and it was a big thing back then. And Bernardo talked a lot about that in his paper, so that was very helpful when understanding different aspects and point of views of the manifest destiny.
All right. And save the best for last. If you had another team member, group of 6, what's a topic that they could talk about that would have been a contribution to the project?
I'd say the 6th member could talk about the spiritual effects, because as AP did ethical, we could tie those two in and put those informations in our presentation too.